So we have the inner, and when we recreate also the shadow. So the shadow is going to be a dark blue with this code, and then I'm going to set to 30% opacity, 15Y, and 20 blur. So I'm gonna resize back to the full size of the frame, and now I can delete this merge bitmap. And the rest is just to set the corner radius to 16 right here. So I just recreated, still has the same problem, but at least if I use constraints, so instead of having a fixed width, I'm gonna remove the fixed width and set the constraints to left, top, and right as well. And like this, it's going to adapt when I resize the frame. On top of that, I need to make sure that the elements inside are going to be sticking to the right positions as I resize. So for example, this little wireframe background, I'm gonna set it to the right instead of the left. And also this illustration, I'm going to set it to the right as well. So now when I resize this, it's looking pretty good. Add a trigger, set it to tap, and then first thing is to animate the card itself. I'm going to move it. If I click this, it's simply going to move to the top left, and I'm going to also resize it using scale. Nice. And voila. The cool thing is that I didn't have to animate the elements inside, especially the right ones. Now I'm going to fix the corner radius for radius, and then the goal is to create something that is similar to this screen right here, but we have more elements in play. So we have this text, and then we have the white background. So we're gonna have to create those elements. First of all, I'm going to create a new scene and import the full view scene. And now I have this one, which is the text. So what I'm gonna do is the white background, I'm going to recreate it using a rectangle, but for this one, I'm just gonna copy it in case that I'm gonna use it later on. So I'm gonna go back to home, and inside the card container, I'm going to first of all create a new shape called rectangle. We're gonna rename it background, and underneath expand the background, and it's going to be white. For now, I'm going to set it to the same corner radius, which is 16. And then I'm going to this card container, which is really important. I'm going to set the position to 30, 30. So it's going to start right here. Now we can start animating. The first thing is the background. So I'm going to set device, which is 375.812. And if I click, now you can see that the background just covered the whole screen. If I click, now you can 812, cover the whole screen. If 375.812, I'll just cover the whole screen. And then I'm going to animate the text. So I'm gonna click the text and set the text. So when I click, now the text presents to 400. So when I click, now the text presents itself. One thing that I need to fix is just the status bar. I'm gonna put it underneath so that I can hide it as I go to the second screen, to the second scene. I'm gonna click on the scene editor, and I don't really need the second scene anymore because I can just reuse the first scene. I'm going to duplicate this scene. The first one I'm gonna name home, and the second one I'm gonna name full view. Jumping to the second scene, which is called full view, I just need to rearrange my layers so that it fits exactly what I'm gonna see in my design. So it's very simple. First of all, I need to move this to the top left and resize it like this, just the same way that I animated. So on the cover, I'm going to set the corner radius to 0. For the background, let's set it to the full size of the device, 812. And for the text, we're gonna set the Y position to 400. Then I can reverse the animations. So if you need to know the values, you can find in the sketch file or in the first scene. In this case, I'm just gonna put them. So for the card move, we're gonna move to 16 and then 140. For the scale, we're gonna move back to 343. The radius, we're gonna of the white background, it's gonna be 343 and then 350 in terms of height. And then we're gonna move the text to 30. Okay, so if everything works well, if I click here, it should just go back to the way the first screen is supposed to look like. And now I can just jump back to the first screen and then do a proper jump. So after tap at the end right here, I'm going to add a jump to the full view, and it's not going to be instant, it's going to have a delay. So I'm going to set the delay right after the animation is over, not before. So when I click here, you can see at this point we're on the second screen, and on the second screen I need to make sure to come back. So I'm using the jump again to go back to home, set the delay to be after. Voila. But we do have a problem. The problem is that once the animation is over and we jump, the animation does not reset afterwards. So what you need to do is to reset the selected scene. And this is really important. And I need to do that for both jumps. So I'm going to select the first jump as well and click on reset the selected scene. And if I do that right, I should be able to go back and forth forever. Of course, we can also decide to change the animation to be spring, which add a really nice effect. So here I'm going to set it to, let's say, this one. But when I do that, I can see that my duration for this animation is going to be very long. So I need to adjust also my delay for the jump. So now I see the full animation. In this case, I'm just going to set it to 320. And now I have a duration of 0.65, which means that I can set my delay to 0.7 or 65, which is fine. And I'm going to do the same on the full view scene, setting to spring, 320, jump set to 0.7, and now I have a really nice spring animation scene to that scene. And secondly, we can also create some interesting interaction, which we're going to learn in the next section, where we can drag. So I'm going to go to the second scene and we're going to start dragging and then adding some really nice effect. And then after the drag, it's simply going to change the scene. So it allows you to create something that is very, very realistic to how you would build that in code in a real app. So make sure to stick around. We're going to learn about pull to dismiss interaction in the next session. I'll see you then. So let's Hi, welcome back to the 7th section of the Protopy course. Today we're going to learn about pull to dismiss. Oftentimes in the detail screen, you're able to pull the content. And welcome back to the 7th section of the Protopy course. Today we're going to learn about pull to dismiss. Oftentimes in the detail screen, you're able to pull the content and then see sort of like the previous screen from where it comes from. But also when you reach a certain momentum, then it goes back and animates back to the previous screen. So let's start with begin pull dismiss.py. This is where we left off from the previous section. And we're going to go to the second scene, which is called full view. And here I'm going to set for the card to add a trigger called pull. And when you do that, you have to set the direction and also the distance. I'm going to set the distance to 300. And if you set the direction to right, it's just going to allow you to drag from left to right. I can also select the other directions, such as to the left, to the top, and to the bottom. Now the distance is the maximum distance that you can drag this to. So this is 300, so that's why it stops right here. And the other thing is, with a pull, if you don't go over to a certain distance, it's going to come back to where it was. But if you exceed that distance, then it's just going to stay there, and also it's going to start animating whatever you have set up right here. The other thing is, we're going to set an animation while dragging, and in order to do that, we're going to need a touchdown trigger. And here we're going to set the scale for the card to a factor, scale to 90%. So now when I drag, it sets to 90% in terms of scale. If you want to be able to center this as you scale, what you need to do is to go to the card element and set the origin to top center. This is going to affect the move properties that you set manually here, but we're going to fix that later. For now, when you start dragging, at least you're going to see that we have the animation that we want here. So now we need to put back the scale to 100% when we're done with the drag. So on release, I'm going to add a trigger called touch up, and here select card, and then set the scale to factor 100%. So when I release, it's gonna come back to 100%, and I also need to move to 0 in terms of Y position. Unfortunately, I cannot use reset here because touch up and tap can become conflicted, and that would break the flow of my transition back to the previous screen. Another thing I want to do is to set the radius of this blue cover. So I'm gonna set radius this, and I'm gonna set this to 16, and once it's touched up, I'm gonna set back the radius to 0. So now I have something like this. I also want to add a dim background. So what I'm gonna do is close card first of all, and then go to shape, create a rectangle. I'm going to name this mask. I'm gonna set the background to black. Also, we need to make sure that the size of it is going to take the full screen. So 100%, 100%. Now that I have the mask in touchdown, I'm going to add a new animation called opacity and set this one to 50%. And for touch up, I'm going to set the opacity to 0%. So now we have a nice dim background, and when we go back, it just goes back to 0% opacity. So going back to the poll, right now we have all our animations set up, but what we want to do is that if we reach a certain point in our poll, we want to move to the previous screen. So we essentially need exactly the same animations as these. So I'm going to copy and paste everything that's inside the tab and put it in poll. So now when I go and I don't do enough distance, it's just going to go back. And if I do enough distance, then it's going to transition back to the previous screen. But as I've mentioned before, we have the problem with the move, because when you change the origin of your element, then the hard-coded position that you move to has to get changed as well. To fix this, we're gonna need to look at the current position. So when we set to top left, it's 0, and when we set to top middle, it's this number, so 187.5. I'm going to take this number and go to move and set the X position to 187.5, and the same for poll to 187.5. So now when I click, the position seems fine, but we have another problem. The problem is that touch up has move and scale, which can be conflicted with tap and the animations in poll as well. So you can actually prioritize which animation you want, and the ones that are at the bottom will be in priority. So I'm gonna move touch up and touch down to the very top. And so my tap and my pull is going to have priority in terms of animation. So now when I click here, it just animates beautifully. And when I pull, it's not gonna do anything if I don't have enough distance, but if I do, then it's just gonna do my transition. So that's the poll to dismiss technique that I wanted to share with you today. I hope you enjoyed. In the next session, we're going to learn how to create a login experience with multiple screens that are scrollable using pages. It's going to detect the scroll position, and it's going to apply to a page indicator. So I hope to see you in the next session. I'm from Design Plus Code. We are on the 8th section of the ProtoPie course, and today we're going to learn how to create a page scroll with 3 pages so that you can swipe back and forth between these pages and also change the background color, but also detecting the scroll position by using a little bit of formula. Make sure to have the sketch file open so that we can import these screens from scratch, but otherwise the template is provided. First thing is we're going to create a new pie, and then we're going to import from Sketch the login, sign up, and learn more, setting to 3x. Then we're going to import the other 2 screens. Perfect. Now we're gonna go back to the first scene, and this is where we're gonna keep some elements that are being shared across the scenes. So first of all, we're gonna select everything, and then we're gonna create a group, because this will automatically create a full screen, so 375 by 812. We're gonna name this one login, and then we're going to take out the parts that are being shared. For example, the status bar and the dots. The second thing is we're going to create a container that is a paging container, and we're gonna use 100% and 100% for the height as well. And then we're gonna put the login inside this container. Now, if you swipe this left and right, you're gonna see that the page container as well as the status bar stays there while the rest of the content can be swiped. But we need more pages, so we're gonna go ahead to the other screens and then turn them into pages. So this is the container for sign up. I'm gonna copy this, go back here, and paste right here. Now I'm going to remove the status bar as well as the dots. Then I'm going to position the sign up so that the position starts at the width of the screen, which is 375. And like this, when I start swiping, it just goes back and forth between these 2 screens. Let's do the same for the third screen. So create a container, name this learn more, and then copy, go back to the first scene, put that right here inside the page container. Then we're gonna remove the status bar as well as the dots and position this for the X position 375 multiplied by 2, like this, so 750. Now we have 3 screens inside our page scroll, and then we can swipe back and forth between these screens. Okay, so that's easy enough, and this is a fairly common interface for user onboarding. The first time the user comes to an app, they're gonna see something very similar to this. They're gonna see an intro to the app, and then they can swipe to the next screens until they see a login, a sign up, or a skip button. The first thing we need to do here is to indicate using this page indicator that we are on the second or on the third screen. So what we're gonna do is add a trigger for page scroll, and we're gonna use detect. Now, what is detect? Well, this allows us to always see changes in any properties of any layer. For example, we want to detect the changes when the user is scrolling the page scroll container, and anytime there's a change to the scroll, then it's going to affect the responses. In this case, we're going to set a condition and set the property instead of X to scroll. So the scroll of page scroll would be equal to 0 for the first condition. Now, what is this scroll value? Well, it is essentially the offset. So as you scroll, it's gonna say 0 here, and as you scroll, it's gonna be 10, 20, and so on. So this is the position horizontally or vertically. So if it's vertical, it would be Y, horizontal would be X, and at the start, it's 0. For this first condition, we're going to open the dots container and set opacity we're gonna set the first dot to 100%. And then the second dot, again, set opacity. We're gonna set it to 30%. And the third dot, opacity, to 30%. If you look at the demo, you're gonna see that it does affect the percentage in terms of opacity for these elements, but the problem is they're already by default with opacity. So what you can do here is a little trick. It's to update your layers. So I'm gonna go back to Sketch and make sure that this is by default 100%. And now coming back, I'm going to import Sketch, set to login, and then import. What is interesting about this is that ProtoPie is going to detect all the layers that I have here versus the layers that I have in Sketch, and will update automatically the ones that have been changed without affecting the structure, which means that as I reorganize some of these layers into different pages and the dots outside, and then it simply detected that there were changes for these 3 layers. Great, now I can see the changes reflected here, so that's great. And when I scroll and I come back, it does change to the opacity when I have the page scroll to 0. And then all I need to do is to set the default to 30% as well for these 2 layers. Now you might be asking, why is it that Detect didn't simply set these by default? Well, Detect is only going to start activating when the user starts scrolling. As a result, this will not be activated at start. Okay, so let's do the other 2 conditions. So I'm gonna copy and paste this 2 times. For this one, I'm gonna set to 375 and this one to 750. Then I'm gonna set the opacity correctly for these 3 dots. So for the second condition, so for the second page, this one is gonna be 30%. It's going to be the third one that it reacts beautifully to the changes. Okay, so another thing we can do is change the background color as we scroll. So I'm going to create a new layer called rectangle, and I'm gonna set it to the size of my background right here. I'm gonna put that layer underneath everything, and I'm gonna call that background. Then I'm gonna set the fill to use the same color as this one, and I'm gonna make sure to delete the backgrounds for each of the screens. So the layer named card. And we should be good. So all of these screens share the same color, and we can just change those colors using the conditions and the response. I'm going to select background and create a new color animation. Set the fill hex to the same color as this one. I'm gonna use the code, the third condition. Voila, I'm going to be able to change the color when I scroll to each of those screens. Now to make the color animation nicer, we can make it slower. So I'm gonna click on all of these and set it to 0.5. So the animation is a bit slower and much nicer to look at. One last thing that I wanted to show you is how to detect in real time the position of my scroll so that you have a better understanding of the scroll value. So we're gonna create a new text layer. We're gonna put it right here. We're gonna set it to 50 by 22. Let's center that. I'm gonna set it to 0 by default, and let's go to the text and center the text. Make it white, 12 in terms of size, and then add a little fill that is black to, let's say, 30% with a radius of 5. Now, as we detect this, we don't need to set the condition to be able to change the text value. it's going to be text. And for the text, we're gonna select the text one, which we just created right here. And instead of using text, which is not dynamic, we're gonna use formula, which can be dynamic. In order to use formula, we have to click this little button here, and it's gonna allow us to use auto completion. So I'm going to click on tilde to be able to search for any of those layers, and I want to use the page scroll, specifically the scroll offset, and press OK. So when I have this, then every time that I'm scrolling, so using the detect, it's going to change the value of my text, and therefore we have this value changing in real time. I think that's really cool. I hope you're having fun learning these techniques. In the next session, we're going to take this to the next level and add a form. So using inputs and then a submit, so that we can set up like a success message with animation. And I think it's gonna be very useful. See you in the next session. Hello there, this is the 9th section of the ProtoPie course. Today we're going to learn how to create a login experience, and that includes setting up inputs so that we can detect error messages, but also we can scroll so that we can focus on the input itself. And once the validation is good, such as email@gmail.com, then we can go to a success page with animation with the email that has been entered transferred over to a new text. This animation right here can be a GIF file or an MP4 file, and you can find the 9th section of the ProtoPie course. Today we're going to learn how to create a login experience, and that includes setting up inputs so that we can detect error messages, but also we can scroll so that we can focus on the input itself. And once the validation is good, such as email@gmail.com, then we can go to a success page with animation with the email that has been entered transferred over to a new text. This animation right here can be a GIF file or an MP4 file, and you can find that on websites like logicfiles.com, where it's a good representation of your animation asset. And in the final app, you can be using the Lottie asset instead. So we're gonna start from scratch again, and make sure to have your sketch file open. We're gonna import the login artboard. So I'm gonna create a new pie, and then I'm going to import from Sketch, specifically the login at 3x. Okay, so the first thing I wanna do is to set up my scroll. Specifically the login at 3x. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to set up my scroll. So the idea is that we're going to put inputs, and when you click on it, it's going to scroll and focus on the inputs. But the first thing is to create a scroll. So I'm going to create a new container, a scroll container, and set it to 100% width as well as height. Then put everything except for the status bar and the home indicator inside it. So this is going to be called scroll, and now my screen is scrollable. The first thing I'm going to do is to create those inputs. So in this container called inputs, we have bitmaps, so we're going to replace these by inputs. I'm going to go to text and insert an input. Now the goal is to recreate exactly the same style as this, so I'm going to go ahead and change the fill border. Pro rounded, 15, and then change the color. Let's change the placeholder text. So in placeholder, we're gonna put your email in cap. The placeholder text can have a different color, so we can either use the same color or a different color, it's up to you. Now we just need to align this and replace the bitmap that you can delete now. If you wanna fix the padding, you can scroll down to the bottom and just uncheck padding. And now I can name this to email, resize this a little bit, and then I can duplicate this and create password as well. So I'm gonna move this and change the placeholder to password. And now I can delete. The bitmap for password as well. So now we have inputs, and if you click on it, you can start typing, but you can see that we have a problem with the focus on the input. And typically this is the same for when you're building the app, you actually have to have a scroll and then set the positioning of your content when the keyboard is showing. So that's exactly what we're gonna do, we're going to select the email field and then add a trigger for that that says focus. And focus, you have focus in and out.